welcome back to Simply Human. Hi, Karen.
Hello, I'm so excited about today's topic, assuming the killer of curiosity. Woo! Hot topic.
Yeah, we've decided that this was in the series of foundational skills that we've been working on and dealing with conflict. So we are putting together about 4 different episodes that are independent but can be put together to help build foundational skills in dealing with conflicts. And the first part of this is understanding this cognitive function, this sort of innate wiring that we have to make assumptions that was necessary to help our survival, but now in our modern day ends up causing a lot of problems in interpersonal relationships. We are going to start today, Karen. I think this is something that you see in your work environment when you're working with leadership teams.
Yeah, and also I would want to say that, as you guys know, I've had a strong case of imposter syndrome, we'll say. And this has also been a key to my recovery in imposter syndrome because this is, like we said, pretty basic that all humans have. Understanding this is an important lesson. And I really believe that this was my first big chunk of information that I learned this back in Masters of Organizational Development about the assumption ladder. And then I think that's when it started to like change a little bit. And it also was in the workplace when everybody says active listening, you should active listen better, listen better, listen better. It's hard to listen better because one, we're problem solving, but also because we're making assumptions. It'll up your level of active listening because you'll be checking your assumptions while you're hearing it. And I think that was so powerful for me to change my whole interaction with other people, interaction with my spouse. And so that's why I'm so excited about sharing this episode, I should say.
I love that you're linking together the two, that understanding about assumptions is going to actually help with that active listening.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get to that, I think, in a different episode, but thank you so much for mentioning that now. But right now, I'm going to back us up a little bit, actually a lot, back us back us up to the lizard brain again and our caveman days. So the first question is, why do we assume? Why is this a function of the brain? When we say that we all do it, if you're a human being, you make assumptions. The reality is there's an aspect of this in survival throughout nature. There are insects that mimic other insects. For example, there is a spider that has this red coloring on it that looks like it's a black widow, except that the red spot is in the wrong place. But still, it's relying on the other insects who might eat it to make an assumption that this is a poisonous and dangerous spider, so it leaves it alone. Or does that
Wow.
make
Yeah,
yeah?
I
Or
never
there's
thought about it, how it's just not us. It goes all the way back to insects. That's kind of cool.
no, I have a dog. I have a black and tan coonhound, which if y'all don't know what that is, kind of looks like a Doberman in the sense as a black face with these golden eyebrows. And when she's sleeping, those eyebrows look like she's awake. So that creatures again make an assumption that she's awake and they will be wary about coming near her. So you can see even there's
Oh, wow.
mushrooms. There's these mushrooms that look just like these poisonous mushrooms. They all look almost identical. So if you're a mushroom and you want to make sure you're around long enough to drop your spores, it's real helpful to look just like a poisonous one because, again, the creatures make this assumption from innate learned experience not to eat you. So you survive. As assumptions is really an aspect or process of learning and learning things that help us survive. That's one big aspect of assumptions. Now, another one is just efficiency. You know, as we've become more modernized, we make assumptions to be able to move more quickly. For example, when I come up to a stop sign, I am assuming that the other cars are going to stop as well,
Yeah.
a general assumption. I'm not going to have to stop every single time and say, okay, there's that red sign with white letters on it.
And
And
what
what
am
am
I
I supposed to
supposed to
do?
do? Yeah. It's not like you have
We,
to make a decision because your brain automatically goes through that routine of thinking. We process so quickly. We don't even think about it. It just like happens.
Yeah, and you can see how then assumptions come out of the process of learning and memory.
Mm-hmm.
So we have survival, we have efficiency, and then we also have in our really modern brain a sort of an egocentrism that drives assuming, is that human beings tend to make assumptions about other people's lives based on our own experience in life. And then we assume that we're correct because
Yep.
we know our experience to be true. And I see this a lot in interpersonal relationships. Oh, I can't say X, it'll hurt their feelings. And why? Well, it would hurt my feelings if I heard that. Therefore, it'd be hurtful to the other person.
So that's why you don't
And
share. That's why you don't share, right?
yeah, there's assumptions, or, we see how it links to imposter syndrome. Oh, I can't say that because they will think,
That
who
I
does
don't
she
like
think
them.
he is?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, or
Or
they're
I
mad
don't
at
know
me.
my
Or
stuff. It might be a fraud. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, but not so much that. But if I have imposter syndrome and I don't think that I'm legitimate,
Oh yeah,
and
that's
I
that's
and
good.
I view that through my worldview, then I'm going to assume everyone else is thinking the same thing about me.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by egocentric assumptions, an assumption based on our own experience of what we know to be true. It's basically tied to projection. We then project that onto someone else and assume they are thinking the same thing. And it must be true because I think that about myself. I think that I don't really know what I'm saying. Therefore, they must think that I don't know where I'm saying. So you can
Yeah,
see
yeah,
how
exactly,
this,
exactly. Yep,
doesn't that make sense?
yep, yep, yep.
And when you were talking about imposter syndrome, did you ever notice that happening where it was your own inner critic that you're like, oh, they're going to think I
That's
dot, dot,
always it,
dot.
right? That's always it. And the thing is, I think that's why the assumptions was so critical, because what we're teaching today and talking about today is exactly a key component for me to understand, because assumption is always what killed me. It just does.
And when we are making these assumptions about other people, we're not being curious, right? So you can start seeing this connection with curiosity. When we assume what other people are experiencing is true because that's what we feel in ourselves, we don't even stop to check. We don't ask any questions.
And that's part of what my work is with leader teams, is really where I've been working this, where assumptions are a killer, because part of the ability to have dialogue is to get everybody's opinion. There's perceptions of people that people have of these various people. So there could be this perception of someone who's always a naysayer, or there's always a brown noser. And so if you ask people, they'll name them for you as a consultant outside, right? And that's the problem when you have to take the leadership team to take them to the next level. You have to teach them how to put aside the assumptions, because when that person comes in the room, you can't have those quote unquote labels. Like, I know he's going to say this, because actuality, he may say something that is amazing because of all the other things that he's seeing and that he could provide insight, but you've already knocked him out of the conversation subconsciously, that when he's talking, your brain says he's not going to say anything worthwhile, so I might as well just let me think about what other groceries I need. No, this is an exaggeration, but it's really not about, you make that assumption that he's not worthy to talk in here. It's not going to be of any value. And that's the problem, because then they can't have the type of conversation they need to have that shared understanding before decisions can be made within a leadership team. Does
And
that make
this is
sense?
where you're talking about how they're bringing in
Mhm.
experiences that
And
maybe
a
they've had
life
with this
experience,
person.
experience they had with this person. Maybe this person reminds them of someone
Mm.
that's not this person, but it could be even experience of someone of this type of person, quote unquote. Like, an example would be, I make this assumption that because I heard he went to Harvard, he's going to be XYZ, right? Or, you know what I mean? Or he went to a community college, he's going to be XYZ. There's some of those life
Yes,
experiences, and you
yes.
just assume. And you don't even know sometimes. Like, it's interesting for me when sometimes, because we were talking about earlier, the fastness of it, your brain just takes those assumptions in. And this is where we want to teach the ability to slow it down a bit and how to do it, which we'll do later on. Like we've been talking about culture. So I want to tell you a little bit about a culture experience, or the gender, race, and some other things you were thinking about to build
Well,
upon a
you've
little bit more.
mentioned around culture, like with Chinese culture,
Oh yeah, of
your
course.
assumption was that your elders know more than you, and that's the assumption from your life experience, and then you went into workforce and said, well, anybody senior to you must know more than you,
Yeah. So
which
don't speak up. Yeah. And they
yeah.
and it could be like because they have a title, a senior associate, and I'm an associate. So I make the assumption that they know more. So I never valued my own voice because I'm making an assumption that they've been in the game a lot longer, even though I have my MBA and I did some work earlier, but I never valued it. And so this is why that's the trick that I had to get over is the authenticity to value my own voice, but also to value the voice of other people. Like to me, some ways there's the assumption is creating that story, Christina. I'm making up a story, but I always evaluate too. Like the assumption is creating a story about whatever's happening too.
Yeah, and Karen, I want to go a little bit into like the consequences in just one
Yeah, do
second.
it.
So if you can
Yeah.
hold that thought, I just want to wrap up sort of the things that contribute first, and then we
Mhm.
can jump into that. So, what we've said is that there's some old brain survival instincts, there's a processing efficiency from learning and memory, there's a tendency to be egocentric, to come from your own point of view, and then there's life experiences that influence our tendency to project. We're bringing our past experiences into the present moment. There's culture, there's gender, race, sexual orientation, religion,
Mhm.
whatever those aspects of our own life experience are. And like I'll give an example from a training that I did with my mentor at the time. And back in the day, when Karen and I were working, and we didn't have laptops and easy computers, we had a thing called an overhead projector. And you had these clear transparencies that you would print your slide on and throw it onto the projector. And these transparencies came in different colors: red, blue, green, yellow, and clear. And the way that my mentor, Leona, would demonstrate how we have these assumptions based on our own life experience was she would have two people face each other and talk to each other. And then you would hold up and talk to each other through one of these colored transparencies. So mine would be like, blue represented being female, and the partner's his would be, orange representing being male. Now you couldn't quite see each other as well through these two lenses. And then she would say, now put on your religion, add another transparency, add your work experience,
Which is
add,
all
your
different
family,
colors, which are all different colors.
all
That's
different
the
colors.
point. Yeah,
And by the
exactly.
time you've got 3 or 4 of these
You
things
can't
in
see
front of
anything.
you, not only can you not see the person in front of you, but all you see is yourself, because these plastic transparencies were just reflecting you now back
Back on
again.
you. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. It was such a powerful experience. So this is something I recommend if you're listening to this and you're a leader and you want to teach this to your group and you can find these transparencies, I highly recommend you do this exercise because it is a really powerful exercise. Now, in terms of like jumping now into what happens, what happens when we make assumptions. Now, we talked the benefits of assumptions is survival for if you're trying to pretend you're big and scary and you're not, um, it's more efficient, so that can be a benefit. You're using learning, you've assumed certain basic things, and it helps you be efficient. But there's also this problem with cognitive errors that happen, and the two that I'm going to just mention quickly is one called confirmation bias, and that's what Karen was talking about. Is I expect to see the person, anybody with a community college degree, not to have that great of education or experience. So now I'm looking for signs to confirm that bias, which I think is kind of what you were saying, right, Karen?
Mhm.
So confirmation bias is definitely a problem to be on the lookout for. Are you looking for evidence that supports the belief that you have? And this happens a lot in relationships. So
Yeah.
if you have a relationship and you've had some struggles over time, say it's about chores, then sometimes sometimes it's you start noticing every little thing that your partner doesn't do because you're looking for that confirmation that your partner doesn't care.
It's like
And
another
you're
one, another one. Yeah. Like, Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like me and my
Y
fraud, right? I'm looking for another fraud example, another
Right, right.
right? It's like again, once you have this one set of glasses on, like the red, you look for another red, you look
Yes.
for another red, right? Because we want proof.
Yes, that's absolutely right, and you mentioned that in the imposter syndrome episode, that's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely right. And then another problem or consequence of assuming is something called implicit bias. And implicit bias happens when we take all those life experience that we talked about, and over time, it recedes into the background. It really recedes into your unconscious so that it's much more automatic. And I'm going to give two examples. They've done some studies where they've talked to children, and based on what children see in cartoons and children show, and they'll say, what does a bad guy look like? What does a dangerous person look like? And you're like, oh, they dress like a bum, and they haven't shaven, and they have a mean face. Well, this is exactly why now today we teach children to have a safe word, because they're not thinking that the man in a suit driving a Prius who pulls up and says, "Hey, Sally, Sally, like your mom asked me to come pick you up,"
Yeah.
right? Because it's not fitting
Yeah,
what
exactly.
is already implicitly in there. So, because of that tendency for implicit
They trust.
biases, they trust just because of who they've seen who drives a Prius and wears nice clothes. Oh, that equals probably a good grown up, because a bad grown up looks like this. It's in the background. And to keep kids safe, we had to do something to intervene in that implicit assumption. But I thought that was a great example. And the other place, I'm going to share a little bit of a video clip right now from Dr. Bryant Marks. And he is probably our national expert on implicit bias. He's from Morehouse College, has done tons of research, lectures, and teaches, and he works with law enforcement. He works in schools. I got to attend a live webinar through one of the health insurance companies that I work with, and they provided this for free to healthcare providers. And he talks about implicit bias. And this clip I'm going to show is about implicit bias towards African American males. So this is our first time doing this, folks. I am actually I have to hit the buttons.
Too, and the thing. Okay. All
So
right,
Karen, this
let's
is
go.
showing.
Yes, it's
Okay.
exciting. We're
So I'm
learning
just going
new
to show.
things, Christina.
I'm going to do just a little bit of this clip, and the question, if you can't read it or if you're on the podcast, the question is: when Americans think of young Black males, what words or phrases come to mind? And you answer real quick. And what happens is they then create a word cloud. And if you don't know what a word cloud is or have never seen one, when you have a whole bunch of people putting in data all at once, and then the computer program will create this cloud, and the most commonly entered words will be the biggest words in the cloud, and then they get smaller based on how many data points there are. So, this question, when Americans think of young Black males, what words or phrases come to mind? So, this isn't about what do you think of when you hear young Black males. This is asking, basically, it's what's your assumption about Americans' assumptions? I'm going to tell you right now, our cloud looked exactly the same as this cloud I'm going to show you.
Oh, okay, cool. That's
Yeah.
so interesting. Okay, let's do
Okay,
it.
so here we go.
Think of young Black males. What words, traits, phrases, characteristics do you think come to mind? Just go with your gut, just sort of what comes to mind, right? So I'm going to show you some results and then we'll break this down. All right, so now these, what you see here.
Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and read this. So for those of you who are watching YouTube,
Wow.
and for those of you who are on podcasts, the word cloud comes up, and the biggest word is dangerous. And then the next biggest word is criminal, and thug, aggressive. We have some somewhat medium words: athletic, strong, criminals, angry, basketball, threatening, crime. But you could see this is what you think Americans think when they think of young Black males. And what he goes on to talk about is, imagine now you're a young Black male going in for a job interview. And this is what is in the background of that person's mind. Or you're going to get a home loan, and this is what's going on in the back, or buy a car, or go jogging in a neighborhood, or go to a 7-Eleven. This is the implicit bias that's there. I remember when I did this training, I think I just started to cry when I just like,
No,
oh my
I'm
God.
very quiet because I can see that. I mean, you know, yeah.
And that word cloud, like I said, that word cloud, that was exactly the same as the healthcare providers, so doctors, nurses, and mental health. This cloud was teachers.
Mhm.
And law enforcement, their cloud looked exactly the same.
Oh, interesting.
So this is why it's so important to start to tune into our assumptions, is because there's really dangerous consequences to it. Right? We talked about like kids might get into a car with a dangerous person, or this is where you could be you're a young Black male jogging down the street and you could be killed.
Well,
So
it's
it's
interesting.
incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, but I also think what's interesting too is I was just thinking about this, about even the stories about, like, when my dad had dementia, right? I had all these assumptions about my dad and dementia. And then when I had it, I had to, like, it wasn't exactly what I envisioned, right? But I think that's the whole point. It's just because of what we hear, like, even in the news, like, there's all this misinformation. So I start to make assumptions. And then sooner or later it becomes implicit bias. Or even when I was a Christian, there's some implicit bias I have about that too.
Yes.
And then if you go further, it's, I don't know, it's just very interesting that when you start to learn about this and you wake up and you hear about this, then you learn the techniques and tools that we're going to be sharing, you use it. It's so powerful because it slows it down. I feel like I've become a
Yes.
better human being because of it, and that's what's so cool about it. But it's still,
And
I'm
I'm more
still
curious.
learning
You become
about
a more,
yeah, but I'm even still learning more about my assumptions because I have other things back here. It's like peeling and peeling. Like, I don't know if I'll ever stop, right? Because I think I'm just like you just said, I'm
well,
wired to make
no. And
assumptions, right?
that was the point, Karen, right? We can't entirely stop the process of making assumptions, because I told you about those earlier primitive reasons why it's in our limbic brain. So it's always going to be going on there. It's associated with learning. As long as we're learning, we're going to be making assumptions. As a matter of fact, Dr. Bryant goes on to, I love this training because it's so compassionate, understanding. There's no blame in it. He's like, listen, if you're a human being, you're going to have implicit biases. And I'm going to be putting the link. It's about an hour. And he does talk fast. So if you have trouble with that, I've played it at 0.75 speed on YouTube, and it's just like listening to someone speaking normal speed. So if it's too fast, you can slow it down. And I'm also going to be providing a link to Harvard has this implicit bias study going on. And it's a link where you could go pick any of a number of them. You could do racial, you could do African American, Caucasian, you could do Middle Eastern, you could do gender. You can pick anyone and you can test your own biases against it. So I'm going to put the link down at the bottom. And so then what do we do about this? So today, in the last part of this episode, we are going to introduce the beginning of a model called the ladder of inference. And we're going to introduce what the ladder is. And then in the following episode, we're going to go even deeper into how you use this ladder to change the process of making assumptions, to bring that curiosity, really get in the habit of exercising that muscle of curiosity. So let's just go into the ladder of inference. Does that sound good, Karen? Okay.
My favorite, my eye-opening experience when I learned this. So go for it.
For you, those of you who are listening on the podcast, I'll just describe the image that I'm putting up on YouTube, but it's basically a ladder that has 1, 2, 3, 4, like 4 rungs, and then the top of the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And each represents something. So the very bottom of the ladder is just observable data. It's what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we can touch, just objective, observable data. That's the bottom of the ladder. Now, how the brain works, and this process happens in a nanosecond because we're talking about these implicit processes of assumptions. We're using inference. This is called the ladder of inference, but it's synonymous with assumptions. So what happens is then the brain will focus in on one particular piece of that data. So it'll select it, and that selection is influenced by our biases and the filters and past experiences that we just talked about. And then we make assumptions about what we selected. And that's where we bring our sort of prejudices, our expectations, and our own way of interpreting into the process. I draw a conclusion that becomes fact in my mind. It's the next rung of the ladder. Then you jump to the next one. You adopt beliefs based on these conclusions. And at the very top, then I act based on my conclusions. So let me give you an example of how this works in a relationship. So I had a couple where it was a boyfriend and girlfriend, and he had a job where he had to work late, and then he would go out with friends afterwards, to get a drink, usually around 11. It was in the service industry. So, be 11, 12 o'clock at night, they go out, unwind with drinks. And the observable data was he's not home. And the observable data was the absence of information. He wasn't calling her. She'd be texting, "Are you coming home? What time are you coming home?" And all she knew, her observable data was there wasn't a response. And that's what she focused on. She focused on the lack of response.
I've had
And
that
then
happen to me, so I'm feeling her. I'm feeling her. I'm sure other people are feeling her too. Keep going.
Well, then her assumption on the next one, based on expectations and past experiences where she had been cheated on in the past, was he's flirting with other women. And the conclusion
I could see
on
where that went there.
he's
Yeah.
gonna cheat on me. The belief is I'm always going to be betrayed. And then the action was when he got home was to just unload, be really,
Yeah.
really mad.
Right.
So we actually worked with this. And the main thing this couple would do as they started to understand what the past experiences were that were, if you can see this chart for people on YouTube, there's certain steps of the ladder that then feed into from our past experience. It's called the bucket of assumptions. Because when we get to that point where we make those conclusions, that comes back down, fills our bucket of assumptions we're going to use next time. So her bucket of assumptions had all these past experiences that then feed the other rungs of the ladder.
Yeah, it's just like one more example of this.
Here's another in the bucket.
Yeah.
But that's not what was happening. It was noisy. He had his phone in his pocket, so he didn't hear it ringing. He didn't hear the ping. That's all that it was. He came home around the time when he had said he was going to come home. It was just the absence of responding that triggered her to fly to the top of the ladder. And this would happen in a nanosecond. It wasn't like she slowly walked up the ladder. It would happen pretty quickly. And so the first thing that this couple worked on was whenever one of them noticed that she was at the top of the ladder was just bring attention to that, because you have to notice that's happening so you can walk down the ladder back to observable data. And I said, come up with something you both agree with is your, hey, I think you're at the top of the ladder. And, for them, it was, beach ball. It was beach ball. So whenever it would happen, he'd be like, beach ball, beach ball.
And it worked for them, I would assume.
It worked.
That's great. I always use that. I also like that too, Christina, because I always use a funny word or interesting word to trigger something for, for communication. Says, wait, stop.
Yes.
I do that a lot when someone's going downhill or going through a rabbit hole. We use something like, we use falafel. So it's the same like that. I love that
Yes.
idea.
Yeah. Oh, you know how a beach ball, when you think about, how it pops up into the air.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah. And it goes
really
way
good
up. I mean,
imagery.
that's the whole point. It goes way up and high in the air. Yeah,
It
that's
goes
a great
way
one.
up. It also evokes, it triggers, it relies on other implicit memories because most
Yeah.
people have positive associations with beach ball. So you're using a word that you both agree on, and it's going to trigger that positive memory. So it does bring a smile to your face, and it starts to unwind the reactivity. So there can be a pause to come down the ladder.
I love that.
And then I had one other quick example, and this is more in a team type environment. I was actually teaching a class, and there was one person who would come in late, and he came in late, went to his seat. We were about 5-10 minutes in, sat down, crossed his arms, leaned back, and closed his eyes. And I could see the impact of the room. You can see everyone jumping up, the observable data being late, crossing arms across body and closed eyes, and then their past experience with this person as often being obnoxious, and eye roll. I saw around the room sort of, you could see irritation, anger, eye rolling, frustration with the person. And so what I did was actually use this process of going down the ladder. I just stopped the class. I said, so and so, let's call him John. John, I noticed you came in late and that your eyes are closed. I know some people, they think better with their eyes closed. I'm actually someone who's visual, so I do that. I'm just, I was wondering, are you tired, or is, what might be going on? And he went, oh, yeah, I'm sorry I'm late. He's like, but yeah, he's like, I close my eyes because it helps me hear. He's like, when I see other people, I get really distracted. And he's like, if I close my eyes, it helps me listen to what you're saying. I
Oh,
said,
so you did
oh,
that with curiosity.
yeah,
Wow. And
yeah.
inquiry.
I
Oh,
said, yeah. I said, you know what? There's a lot of people who do need to cut out distraction. I said, I really appreciate that. If you can try to be here on time, that would be wonderful. He was like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. The whole energy in the room kind of calmed down.
hmm.
And then I just turned it into a teachable moment for everyone and then explained the ladder of inference. So that's what walking down the ladder back to the observable data and bringing curiosity. That's the process for using this ladder. There's a lot more to it on how to do that last part. And that's what we're going to do in the next episode.
Now, what's interesting is that one example I thought of that I think I brought this up before, but I'm going to bring it up again because is the example of when someone that I knew from the past, like an executive, and I thought we got along so well when we talked on one, right? On
Mhm.
our one-on-ones. And then we were at this gathering of people, and it's like an employee meeting type of thing. And I could have swore I caught her eye. And I looked at her and smiled, but she didn't do anything. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, she hates me.
Jumped right up to the top.
Oh my God, I don't even know if I had any of the rungs, but I know I did, right? And then I checked it out and she didn't even see me. And it was I just felt like, oh my gosh. And that's the point of this, where it is so fast. Because I swear, I saw her meet our eyes. She didn't,
This
and
is really similar to that other story, right? So sometimes observable data is the absence of something you were expecting.
yeah, I see. I knew there was a reason why I was bringing up this example. Because I think now that we shared it with people, like it happened to me, I tend to be more aware of it. And I think that's what's cool about this. So do you want to share
Mhm.
now about how to really start this?
Well, we're just going to start with this little bit about walking down the ladder to the observable data. Matter of fact, this is what I teach my clients when they'll recount something that happens, and I can tell there's a whole bunch of assumptions and they're already at the top. I'll say, well, what was the observable data? I'll just walk them right back down. What did you actually observe? Well, why did you jump to that interpretation? And they get into the habit. They'll come back, in the weeks, and say, Christina, I caught myself at the top of the ladder and I heard you say, what's the observable data? What's the observable data? And I had to walk myself back down and be, what did I just see? Because like Karen just said, it happens so fast. This is how fast the brain processes so quickly. We've mentioned in past videos about the threat assessing brain is that the first thing you do when you notice you're up is you have to calm your body down. You have to send that signal that, okay, there's not a black widow spider here. Yeah, there's not a saber tooth. Calm it down, take a deep breath,
Unclench.
recognize, yeah, you're not about to be killed. And then be curious and test those assumptions. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. There's a couple of strategies or maybe exercise. One of them is I noticed and fill in the blank.
Right.
And then you own all the stuff in your bucket of assumptions by saying, I imagined you were mad at me. I imagined that you were blowing me off because you didn't answer the phone, because that's what happened in the past. That's what this pattern looked like for me. This is what I noticed, bottom of the ladder. And then this is what's in my bucket of assumptions. And you bring them out and then you ask, is that what's going on? You bring that curiosity.
And I like that, because what I thought was really important is when you're saying that, you're saying, I noticed. If you notice, it's the I statement first, which is very powerful. Because if I just say the whole thing about, if I didn't say I noticed, it wouldn't be where I'm at. And part of the communications that we always miss is we're not sharing them, and so they can understand where we're coming from. Which is when you like you just said, I noticed this, and instead of just saying, did you mean, you could say, I understood, because it allows you to really explore it a little bit further. And that's the whole point of the inquiry, that you're starting with curiosity to better understand, for them to understand where you came from, and then start the part of inquiry to understand.
Right. So when
like you did with that other gentleman, when you told that story with the early gentleman that was asleep.
Yeah. When you make those I statements, you are actually being mindful of all of those aspects we mentioned earlier, life experience, implicit bias, egocentric perspective. And you're now going to say, I'm going to understand that everything I see is my interpretation.
Right. Exactly.
Coming from my egocentric worldview. And then I'm just going to share it and inquire, is this what's going on? Is this true? Is this what your experience is? Right. So that's kind of
what you meant. Yeah, exactly. Is this what happened?
And then another way you could do this is maybe it's more of a feeling that happens. So you may not even know what the observable data is. So that first example, I noticed, fill in the blank, I imagine, fill in the blank. That's when you can actually identify what the observable data is and you can describe it. But sometimes we're up at the top of the ladder and we don't even know how we got there. We're just at the top.
Exactly.
So this is where the second strategy, the story in my head, is where you're having more an emotional reaction, you're having feelings, you don't know why, but trust me, there's a story starting to generate back there. And then you can just say, listen, I don't know what your intentions were or what you mean, but right now, the story in my head is that you really want to be leaving this conversation. Maybe I was subtly picking up facial expressions, or they were saying, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, maybe that's their habit. They say, yeah, 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 yeah. But I'm like, the story in my head is you don't really want to be having this conversation. It's a way to check out the assumption. And the person will be like, oh, everything's fine. The story in my head, use it when you're not even sure what the observable data is. And I notice, I imagine is what you use when you are responding to something that triggered you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've done too is, because I really like those, because to me, I call them sentence stems with my consulting and my coaching stuff, where I put them on a sticky note, honestly, in some place where I can see them, or I put them in some place so that like I said, like in the morning or something, so I can remember to check out assumptions and use those words, because it makes it easier for my brain to use those words. Because if I know that every time I have an assumption, I associate checking out assumptions with I notice or store in my
Yes.
head, it
Yes.
almost gives me an automatic response to it. So like once I go up
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
ladder, it's like almost like trigger word, like you said, or a beach ball. It's like, okay, once I go up the ladder, I know what to do. I noticed. And once
Yes.
I know, I can easily fill it in. But at least I know the words. So it's like, is it an assumption? Did I go up the ladder? Did I not? You just say, I noticed. And so this is how I started to learn to use this and check it out, the assumptions. Does that make sense what I've said?
Yeah, it does. But I do want to encourage people to slow the process
Yes,
down,
I agree. I
because
agree to
this
slow it
gives
down.
you even deeper insight into your own biases, life experiences. So you want to be curious about other people, but I'm hoping that you're also getting out of our Simply Human to be curious about yourself. What makes you tick? What are all the experiences that contributed to how you are engaging with the world? So this ladder of inference, it's such a simple little model, but it's so rich in what you can get out of it. And I just want to say real quick, I've shared in an episode that I'm neurodivergent. I have autistic spectrum disorder. And for me, once they started understanding what that meant, that my brain didn't have the software in it that automatically helps me interpret social communication and social behaviors and social norms, I started realizing, oh, I don't have the luxury of pretty much making any assumptions when I'm interacting with other neurotypicals. I'm like, oh, I have no idea. And Karen and I had a really funny, she had texted me that she was going to be 15 minutes late. And Karen has ADHD, so her text messages often don't have all her brain's so fast, like not all the words get there. So her message was, I need 15 minutes. I got lost in my shower. And I'm visual processor and literal. And the picture in my head was Karen at her friend's house in this vast warehouse that's turned into an apartment with this giant bathroom filled with steam. This is the picture in my head. And she's lost. And part of it was like,
And you
Jill,
asked me when I came
that
on.
doesn't really make sense, but I better ask her. So when she came in, I said, Karen, so you got lost in the shower?
And
She
I was
was
like,
like, oh,
oh, and then dawned on me, lost to her would mean lost, like, but I meant lost
yeah.
in my mind. Like I just got I was in the shower and I was thinking about my business, and so I just got lost in the shower in my thought, not like physically lost. I'm like, oh, I should have known. I said use the wrong word with Christina. That's right. So
Well, that's why for me, it's just a habit now I
yeah.
just don't make assumptions, even when it seems obvious. I was like, I think she meant lost in thought, but
Yeah.
this is the picture in my head right now. So I better just check, because that's really curious how big this bathroom is if
And
she got lost in it.
yeah, but I think the thing is not just for neurodiverse. I just think just it's a pure habit as a human. Like we're getting back at the very beginning. I mean, we just as humans are wired to take assumptions, like you said, for efficiency purpose and all these other reasons. And so that's why it's critical for you to learn this and to practice this skill. This to me, I would say, if I had to think about everything that I learned, I really feel like this is one of the most critical skills I learned, or knowledge insights I had, the ladder of inference, because it made me realize how I could be misreading stuff and to always inquire. So I really love that. I love that.
Yeah.
I love this.
And I want to just wrap this up because we're
Yes.
about at the end. But I want to leave you with this, because the brain does make assumptions. We really can't change that it does that. What I teach my clients is this mantra. And the mantra is assume a positive intention, even if it's poorly executed.
Oh, I
So
totally agree.
if we're
I sense
going
something
to make
similar.
assumptions because we can't help it, then why not always start off with what's the best case scenario? Another version is what's the most generous assumption I can make? It really will shift your whole perspective. It will calm down your nervous system, which will then slow everything down so you can walk down that ladder of inference and engage in inquiry. So, this little nugget that I'm leaving you, I encourage everyone to adopt this. Karen, any last words?
No, I think you said it. I think I'm good. I agree, totally agree
No.
with your last nugget.
It just makes living in this world, especially now where there's a lot of strife, I just use this as my habit. And, it doesn't mean that I'm just going to gullibly believe everything. I'm still going to engage in critical thinking and inquiry. But my starting point is assume a positive intention, even if poorly executed.
I love
And
that.
your attitude and tone is then influenced, because tone is so important. We'll probably have to do an episode on tone, but tone is so important. And if you don't calm your nervous system down and you do that inquiry, you're going to have a tone of suspicion. It's going to come across, which should trigger defensiveness on the other person. But if
Yeah.
you do this, assume a positive intention, you do this mantra, it calms your body. Your tone is more kind, generous, open, and curious. And that's what makes it effective. So everybody practice these skills. Send us an email. It's at simplyhuman.connect@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your stories about trying to work with the ladder of inference. Leave your comments below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe and hit those notifications so you can hear about the next episode coming.
And share
All
it with
right,
other
Karen?
people as well, right? Because we really do believe this is applicable to everybody.
Yeah, let's help
So,
everybody become better
yeah,
communicators.
exactly. So until
All right,
next time,
Karen.
right?
See you
Bye-bye,
next time.
everyone.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.